My child, do not move past this moment too quickly, because something has been placed in your path that your heart has been trying to recognize before your mind could understand it. Pause here. There is a reason these words reached you when they did. Somewhere beneath the noise of ordinary life, beneath the questions you have carried and the silence you have tried to accept, a hidden message has been waiting for you. And what makes this moment unusual is not simply that the message exists. It is that the person connected to your heart may have left it in a way you almost overlooked. Not because they wanted to confuse you, but because saying everything openly felt too vulnerable. Something inside them hesitated. Something inside them wondered whether you would understand. Yet something even stronger refused to let them remain completely silent. There are feelings people speak aloud, and there are feelings they hide inside ordinary gestures. A delayed reply. A familiar song. A sentence that seems casual but carries far more meaning than it appears to. A sudden memory shared without explanation. A photograph left untouched. A name searched and then quickly forgotten from the screen but not from the heart. Your soulmate's message may not have arrived like a dramatic confession. It may have been quieter than that. And that is exactly why you were in danger of missing it. What looks insignificant from the outside can sometimes carry the weight of everything someone was afraid to say. You have been wondering whether the silence between you meant absence. But silence does not always mean the heart has stopped speaking. Sometimes silence becomes the place where the loudest emotions are hidden. Your soulmate has been trying to understand what this connection means without losing control of everything they thought they knew about themselves. They may have told themselves they were being reasonable. They may have tried to move through their day as though your memory had become ordinary. But certain things kept interrupting that illusion. Your name appeared in their thoughts at unexpected moments. Something reminded them of a conversation they never finished with you. A place suddenly felt different because they remembered how it would have felt if you were standing beside them. And every time they tried to dismiss it, another small reminder returned. But listen carefully, because this is where the hidden message begins to take shape. They did not simply miss you. Missing someone can come and go. What unsettled them was realizing that some part of them still wanted you to know something. Not everything at once. They are not ready for everything at once. But something essential. Something they believe could change how you understand the distance, the confusion, or the unfinished feeling between you. Their heart has been moving toward one truth again and again, even while their fear keeps pulling them backward. Perhaps you noticed something recently that seemed strangely timed. A message that arrived after a long silence. A reaction you did not expect. A reminder of something only the two of you would understand. Maybe it was not even direct contact. It could have been a subtle sign within the story of your connection, something that caused you to stop for a moment and think, why now? Why did this suddenly return to me? Do not force meaning onto every coincidence, my child, but do not dismiss what genuinely touches something deep inside you either. Sometimes the heart recognizes emotional unfinished business before the mind has language for it. Your soulmate has been carrying one private fear. They are afraid that too much time has already passed. They are afraid that whatever opportunity once existed between you may be becoming harder to reach. And yet their greater fear is not simply losing the possibility of love. It is losing the chance to be understood by you. There is something they wish they could correct. Something about the way they behaved, the way they withdrew, the way they failed to explain themselves, or perhaps the way they allowed circumstances to speak for them. They know you formed conclusions from what you saw. Anyone would. But they also know there was more happening beneath the surface. That is why the message was hidden. It was not hidden because they wanted to manipulate your emotions. It was hidden because vulnerability frightened them more than distance did. Distance allowed them to pretend they were safe. Vulnerability required them to admit that you mattered. And admitting that you mattered would force them to confront everything they had been trying not to feel. So instead of saying, "I still think about you," they may have asked a small question. Instead of saying, "I wish things had happened differently," they may have brought up an old memory. Instead of saying, "I am afraid I lost you," they may have quietly checked whether you were doing well. These are not declarations. They are doorways. And there is one doorway they are hoping you noticed. Something changed inside them recently. It happened in a moment that would have looked unremarkable to everyone else. They were alone with their thoughts, perhaps late in the evening, perhaps after a conversation, perhaps after seeing something that reminded them of you. Suddenly, the story they had been telling themselves no longer felt convincing. They had been saying that everything happened for a reason and therefore nothing needed to be revisited. They had been saying that if you were meant to speak again, life would arrange it without any effort from them. They had been saying that maybe you had already forgotten. But beneath those thoughts was a truth they could no longer avoid: they had never truly finished what began between you. And that realization did not bring immediate peace. It brought emotion. They began remembering details. Not the dramatic moments you might expect, but the smaller things that only become precious after distance appears. Your way of speaking when you were trying not to laugh. The particular kindness you showed when nobody else noticed what they were carrying. A conversation where you understood something they had not explained properly. The quiet sense that they could be more themselves around you than they had intended. These memories did not return randomly. They returned because their heart was finally willing to examine what their fear had pushed away. And then came the most difficult memory of all. There was a moment when you needed clarity, and they did not give it to you. Perhaps you asked directly. Perhaps you did not need words because your silence was already asking. Perhaps you waited for them to choose honesty, courage, consistency, or presence. They felt that moment. Do not imagine they were unaware. They knew something important was being placed before them. But instead of stepping forward, they hesitated. And that hesitation created a distance neither of you fully intended. Your soulmate has replayed that moment more than once. Not every day. Not obsessively. But enough to know that if they could return to it, they would respond differently. That is part of what the hidden message contains. They want you to understand that their silence was not always indifference. Sometimes it was fear. Sometimes confusion. Sometimes pride. sometimes circumstances they did not know how to explain. And sometimes it was the belief that you deserved a certainty they were not yet mature enough to offer. But here is what they did not expect: stepping away did not erase the connection. It revealed it. When you were close, they could tell themselves your presence was simply comforting. Once distance appeared, they discovered how deeply that comfort had become woven into their emotional world. They began comparing other conversations to yours without meaning to. They noticed that certain people could make them laugh but not feel understood. Others could give them attention but not peace. Some could occupy their time but never reach that private part of them you once touched without even trying. This frightened them. Because suddenly, the question was no longer, "Do I miss this person?" The question became, what if this connection was more important than I allowed myself to admit? Stay with these words, because there is another layer they have not yet been able to say openly. Your soulmate has wondered whether you felt the connection as strongly as they did. They have questioned your silence too. They have imagined different possibilities. Maybe you moved on emotionally. Maybe you became tired of waiting for clarity. Maybe you protected yourself because you believed they would never change. Maybe someone else entered your life and began giving you the consistency they failed to provide. That possibility touches the part of them they hide most carefully. They know they cannot expect you to remain standing in the same emotional place forever. They know love cannot be demanded from someone simply because regret arrived late. And yet something inside them hopes the door is not completely closed. This is why their message is cautious. They are testing the emotional distance without wanting to disturb your peace. They may have wanted to write more and deleted it. They may have opened your conversation and closed it. They may have considered reaching out and then convinced themselves they needed the right moment. But there is something they have begun to understand: the perfect moment may never arrive. Courage does not always come before action. Sometimes action is what creates courage. And heaven's whisper in this story is not commanding you to chase them. It is reminding you not to abandon your discernment simply because emotions are intense. You do not need to force what belongs in your life. You do not need to interpret every silence as destiny. You do not need to sacrifice your peace to prove you care. But you can remain open to truth. You can allow clarity to reveal itself without fear. Because what is coming next in this connection is not about guessing. It is about something becoming clearer. Your soulmate is nearing a point where hidden language will no longer feel sufficient. The subtle signs, unfinished sentences, indirect gestures, and quiet emotional breadcrumbs have helped them avoid confronting the full truth. But now those same things are frustrating them. They are beginning to realize that if they want to be understood, they must eventually speak in a way you cannot mistake. And that realization has created a new struggle. What exactly should they tell you first? Should they apologize? Should they confess how much they have missed you? Should they explain what was really happening when they withdrew? Should they admit that they became afraid when their feelings grew deeper? Should they tell you about the moment they realized they might actually lose the connection? They have considered all of these. But one truth rises above the others. And this is where the message becomes more personal. They want you to know that you affected them in a way they did not fully appreciate when you were close. Something about your presence changed what they began wanting from love. Before you, they may have believed connection was primarily excitement, attraction, attention, or timing. But you awakened something quieter. The desire to feel known. The desire to be emotionally safe. The desire to be seen without constantly performing. You showed them that intimacy is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the strange relief of sitting beside someone and feeling less alone in your own mind. When that disappeared, they noticed. Not immediately. At first, they tried to replace the feeling with distraction. Busier days. Different conversations. New routines. Perhaps even new people. But distraction can occupy the mind without healing the heart. Eventually, there were quiet moments where everything they had pushed aside returned. And one question kept appearing: why did I run from something that felt so rare? They did not have a good answer. That question became the beginning of their awakening. But their hidden message contains more than regret. Regret alone would not be enough. You deserve more than someone returning simply because loneliness made them nostalgic. What is happening inside them is more complicated. They are beginning to see the ways they would need to change if they wanted a genuine second chance at connection. They know they cannot simply reappear and expect everything to reset. They know trust has memory. They know your heart may still care while also remembering every moment it felt uncertain. And this is why they are moving carefully. They are asking themselves whether they can show up differently, not merely speak differently. That distinction matters. Anyone can write emotional words in a vulnerable moment. But love becomes meaningful when words are followed by consistency. Your soulmate is confronting that truth now. They are realizing that if they come toward you again, the connection cannot survive on chemistry alone. It will require honesty, emotional responsibility, patience, and courage. And something surprising happened as they considered this. Instead of becoming more afraid, part of them became more certain. Because for the first time, they were not merely thinking about how they felt. They were thinking about what you deserved. They remembered moments when you gave more understanding than they returned. They remembered your patience. They remembered the emotional effort you made to keep things peaceful. They remembered the times you chose softness when you could have chosen anger. And they began seeing your value through the eyes of someone who finally understands what absence teaches. That realization hurt. But it also matured something inside them. Your soulmate's hidden message carries an unspoken sentence: I see now what I could not see then. Yet there is another part. They also want you to know something about yourself. They believe you have changed. Even from a distance, they sense it. The version of you they remember was loving, patient, hopeful, perhaps willing to wait longer than you should have for certain answers. But something in your energy feels different now. Stronger. Quieter. Less willing to chase what remains unclear. You are learning that peace does not require everyone to understand you. You are learning that real connection does not ask you to constantly prove your worth. And your soulmate feels this shift. It makes them admire you. It also makes them nervous. Because they understand that the person they could once keep waiting may no longer wait. The person who once accepted half explanations may now require truth. The person who once wondered, "Am I enough?" may finally be asking the better question, "Is this connection healthy enough for the person I am becoming?" That is the question heaven wants you to carry. Not, "Will they return?" Not, "Do they miss me?" Not even, "Are we destined?" The deeper question is whether whatever comes next honors the growth you have fought to achieve. Because sometimes the answer to prayer is not the person returning exactly as they were. Sometimes the answer is truth arriving where confusion once lived. And truth is approaching this situation. Your soulmate has one particular truth they have resisted telling you because they fear how you might interpret it. It is connected to the moment things changed between you. You may have believed the distance began for one reason. But from their perspective, something else was happening underneath. Something they never properly explained. It was not simply lack of interest. It was not that you imagined the connection. And it was not because someone else was automatically more important. The deeper reason was internal. You reached a place in them they had spent years protecting. And when they realized you could see beneath their defenses, something inside them panicked. People who have learned to protect themselves emotionally can mistake intimacy for danger. They can want closeness and retreat from it at the same time. They can desire honesty yet fear what honesty will expose. Your soulmate may have recognized that you were becoming someone whose opinion mattered too much. Someone whose absence could genuinely hurt. Someone whose rejection would mean more than they wanted to admit. So they created distance before distance could be created for them. But they did not understand the consequence. They thought pulling away would give them control. Instead, it gave them clarity. And the clarity was simple: they cared more than they had admitted. This is why the hidden message matters. It may be the first small crack in a wall that has existed for longer than you realize. But there is something else you must know before your heart races ahead of wisdom. Their awakening does not obligate you to reopen every door. Their regret does not erase your experience. Their feelings may be genuine, but your boundaries are genuine too. Heaven does not ask you to become smaller so someone else can feel less afraid. If this connection is meant to grow, it must meet you where you are becoming, not drag you backward into uncertainty. And your soulmate is beginning to sense exactly that. They know the old way will not work. They know subtle messages cannot continue forever. They know that if they want your attention, eventually they must bring truth. Not pressure. Not emotional games. Not vague hints. Truth. This thought has been following them. And now we come to the part they almost revealed. There was a moment recently when they came very close to sending you everything. Not a casual message. Not a single sentence. Everything. They began forming the words in their mind. They imagined how you might respond. They wondered whether you would be shocked, relieved, skeptical, emotional, or perhaps completely silent. Their heart beat differently simply imagining your name appearing on the screen. They nearly did it. But then they stopped. Why? Because as they prepared to tell you what they felt, another truth surfaced, one even more difficult than the confession itself. They realized they could not explain their feelings without explaining what happened during the period when you thought they had forgotten you. And that story carries something you do not yet know. Something happened while the two of you were apart emotionally. It was not necessarily dramatic to the outside world, but it changed how they understood your connection. They encountered a moment, a conversation, or a realization that forced them to compare what they had lost with what they were experiencing now. And your name rose to the surface immediately. They suddenly understood why certain connections felt empty. Why certain conversations never reached them. Why even in rooms filled with people, they could still feel the absence of one particular emotional presence. Yours. But there was someone else involved in that realization. Someone who said something your soulmate was not prepared to hear. A friend, relative, trusted voice, or unexpected person looked at them and recognized what they had been refusing to acknowledge. The conversation began innocently, but eventually this person asked a question that stopped your soulmate completely. The question was simple. If you truly do not care anymore, why does their name still change your face? Your soulmate had no answer. And in that silence, everything became obvious. The person continued. They reminded your soulmate how differently they used to speak when they mentioned you. They pointed out that whenever your name surfaced, your soulmate either became unusually quiet or tried too hard to act unaffected. They said something else too, something your soulmate has carried ever since. Maybe you are not trying to forget them. Maybe you are trying to convince yourself you already did. That sentence struck deeper than they expected. For the first time, someone else had spoken aloud the truth they had been hiding from themselves. And afterward, when they were alone, they returned to your messages. Not necessarily to contact you. Just to look. They scrolled through old words. They remembered who they were when they wrote them. Some messages made them smile. Others made them uncomfortable because they could suddenly see the moments where you were reaching toward them and they were already beginning to retreat. Then they found one exchange they had forgotten. Something you said.